Okay, good evening, everyone. So we are on another episode of Working in UX Design, and this is our first episode for the year 2025. And I'm really excited to have our advisor as well as a friend and a community leader on board. His name is Jonathan Yap. He is a design leader and community advocate on the evolving identity of design in Southeast Asia. He is most known for his project, Design Pay Asia, where he dives beyond surface level salary data to uncover deeper insights about career growth, education pathways, and the changing value of design in the region. So, this is a project that he embarked on years ago, and he is actually about to publish his latest rendition, uh, ideally tomorrow, right? So, we're going to have a exclusive sneak peek on some of the data points, but you're going to see it all over the news very, very, very soon. And fun fact, he also brought a volunteer team together to work on it. So they actually managed to dive deeper on many of the data points and the insights. So I think we're all going to have a lot of fun to look at the data. But over this episode, we're going to talk about a few key things that we all care about, including the salaries between men and women in product design, as well as where are the hotspots that are growing in terms of jobs and opportunities in Southeast Asia, and education as well as the value of design within our region. And as someone who is deeply invested in nurturing future design talent, Jonathan regularly speaks about the intersection between design education, industry needs, and regional identity in Southeast Asia growing tech ecosystem. Um, and I also want to share that Jonathan is someone that I had an opportunity to interact with at several occasions. He was an early employee of WeWork, and I did verify with him all the things that happened at WeWork on the Apple TV show, and he said, "Yeah, some of it is really true," and it's been quite interesting to hear his overseas experience. He was originally from Malaysia, and he's now working in Singapore in a Singapore bank right now at a leadership level. So really, really glad to have him come speak about the Design Pay 2025 report and get an exclusive preview around it, as well as all the great things that are related to career, pay, and progression. So, Jonathan, welcome to the show, and how are you feeling today?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Dylan. Pretty good. I don't know how to top that. It's a long and good, intense introduction for me, but yeah, couple of things. I am part of the early team at WeWork in Singapore, not the early for the whole WeWork. Yeah, but still, it's a crazy ride.
Yeah, we can go there if you want to. So yeah, like what was, I guess, you're someone who has worked on overseas gigs as well. I remember you have worked overseas in London, and as well as like working in an international company like WeWork. Maybe let's just start from there, right? Like how has the experience been um working for overseas companies, and how has it changed now, like working for a Singapore bank? Yeah.
Cool. So, I mean, I think if I say this, I'll probably reveal my age a little bit. So I actually started in a company called MySpace back when I actually got my first gig. So if you know MySpace, then yeah, it kind of reveals my age a little bit. But this is post Facebook era, so it's a bit different. Uh, anyway,
Yeah.
so I regularly talk about this as well, going through like layoffs because 3 months in my first gig and then mass layoff, everything got closed off and stuff like that. So a very interesting kind of career, I don't know, trajectory, I would say. So
So
yeah, I think the differences between as I kind of go along the way, I think every junction of my career, I went through like startups, went through agencies, and then like big companies, small companies. All of them teach me like very different things.
mm,
I think the big difference between the overseas when I was back, this was back in London, back in like 2010, 11. It was kind of it was a part of the early stage of the digital transformation. Everyone's going digital websites and stuff like that. Even like UX is not a big thing that back then, right? And
Yeah.
I've got a gig then that says like UX. Oh, what is this thing? And I mean, I had the luxury of learning from an actual information architect back then as well, just to understand the differences. But I think after coming back in like to Singapore, it was a little bit interesting, like going back in time a little bit. But it's also like looking forward, you kind of have that preview. Oh yeah, these are some of the things that we dealt with before, and we're seeing this here again. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah. I really love that you mentioned you have the benefit of foresight after after your overseas gigs and assignment. And that's really fantastic because I know you're also working in a bank today and you're trying to transform the bank. We won't go into details about what you do at your work because I know it's highly confidential. But we are actually going to spend quite a fair bit of time talking about this passion project of yours, and it's called Design Pay. And just remind me how this is what year that this project is on.
So I think originally this started 2020, so it just slightly after the whole COVID and everything lockdown and everything go haywire. So it's 2025, so it's like coming to fifth year in.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what actually led you to start this project? Like I'm sure you're a very busy executive, so like surely there must be something that triggered you to want to like do this with your extra hours. And I know you're a dad as well, so you're probably really busy.
Um, yeah. So I think so one thing to kind of mention as well, like I'm pretty one of my core passions around like just community. Like I've got a lot of benefit out of it, and I saw a lot of value in kind of like giving back as part of that. Part of my journey of like growth. I took so much out of it. I should actually give back, and I find a lot of energy actually participating in this. So yeah, that's how I kind of drive forward in terms of like whether it is design pay, whether it's like meetups and design community. I try to kind of participate. But for design pay itself, the start of the question that I wanted to answer in the first place was like, every time you talk to people, recruiters, hiring teams and stuff like that, there's this unspoken expectation. Like everyone's kind of like, hey, you know what you're supposed to get paid, right? Like, what the market rate looks like, right? But like at that point, I'm like, I mean, we don't really have a source. We don't have money to go and buy those like reports of like how pay bands and things like that. A lot of these things are not accessible, right? A lot of the resources were also available for like the US companies or even the European side. Nothing really around Asia, right? So I just thought like, hey, why not we start a spreadsheet because we've seen this happen before. And back when I was at WeWork as well, there was an initiative to do the same thing as well, like pay transparency. I've learned a lot from that process of like the people running it. And just like, I can try something out, and then it went from there, and then it grew over time.
Excellent. I really love that. And I think this is the fifth year that you're doing this project. There are a lot of more data points versus other years. We're going to talk about a few key ones. Or maybe before we do that, can you let our audience members know how is the 2025 report a little bit different from the previous years?
Okay. So 2020, well, this is 2024 because it's technically the 24
Oh,
surveys.
corrections. Yes, the
Yeah.
2024 data.
Yeah. So
Yes.
the 2023 was the first year that we actually start to put all of these into a report. So that was our first run of it. We tried to learn a lot from that. I think this year we're basically 2024 we're basically trying to build from what we have learned, and then start to really dive a little bit slightly deeper Because I think there's a straightforward part where it's like, oh, how much you're getting paid, demographics, all those stuff. Previously, we had information about just like general sentiments. We made it optional. The whole survey is all fully anonymous anyway, right? Like we try to make sure it's all protected information. And then what we try to evolve now is some of the more thematic stuff. So I think, as you mentioned earlier, we have a bunch of volunteer team members who come together from different regions. And we kind of talked a lot at length in terms of like what are the things that we care about as a design community. What are the topics that comes to mind? So we start to include some of these questions into our survey and part of the sentiment, just to kind of get a sense check of where everyone is and at that moment. So big topics on the year is around like layoffs. Everyone's talking about that, so we had that question as part of it. Some indication of things like career progression, right? A lot of people were super interested in that portion as well. One of the big ones is also things around like the value of design and this whole talk about like design maturity. So we try to include some of them in the questions because it's anonymous. There's a lot of ways we have to kind of work around and see like how do we kind of get that temperature check from the community. But we managed to get some of these questions in.
Yeah. And I also want to celebrate the fact that this year you have more than, or rather say, close to 1,800 responses. Quite a number of them from Indonesia. So heads up to our community in Indonesia. Thank you for filling out the survey. Is this how many times more is this versus like the previous year?
So good question, right? The previous years was I think like 343, if I remember correctly.
So it's about like 6 times less, maybe like
Yes, go
five
to
times
yeah,
less.
five.
Yeah,
It's 5x. Yeah, so you got
yeah,
5x response. Again, like it's
that's
largely
amazing.
down to the community. We had some good partners in Indonesia, especially
Yeah,
this year. So the at least the quality of Indonesia now we get a better fidelity of information, and we can just dive a little bit deeper into some of those things.
awesome. So earlier we were speaking about salaries, and I think one of the first things I really want to dive into is that it's kind of an open secret that there is a salary gap between male and female tech professionals, right? But we don't actually know how big that gap is from a data point of view. But now that you've done that research and you have the report, maybe you could share with our audience members like how big of a gap when we're talking about the product design community, how big of a salary difference do male colleagues draw versus their female counterparts? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So this is like literally half off the press. So like I just crunched this analysis 30 minutes ago. We'll spend some more time on it a little bit more. So context, right? I will come from more like Singapore angle first because I do have the data with me right now. So in terms of what we're looking at, right, across the board, all levels, male and female, all included, we're looking at a median salary of $79,200 per annum, right? This is total compensation, including your bonuses and base pay and everything else. If I recall the numbers previous year was actually like 80 plus, so it's actually a slight drop, right? So maybe layoffs, maybe I don't know. Some question mark there, right? Some interesting trends at point there. Now, for the comparison between male and female across all levels, just straight up, without diving into like whether you're IC or management, we're looking at something like 92K for men on a median, and then 76K on a median for women. So there's still a gap, right? The good news is, previous years we have seen like something like a 46 or 42% gap. Now this year it looks like it's closed down to like 20%. So we're actually doing pretty well in terms of the direction. So, it's still a gap, but it is much, much smaller compared to the previous year. So there's something that we're doing right as a community or as
Yeah.
an industry.
I'm really happy to hear about this. I think I'm asking this question because I was when I was a team manager back at Razer and I had access to my team members' salary, I was actually really surprised that our female colleagues were drawing like lower salary. So I was like, oh, this is really interesting. And they were almost doing like the same amount of work. So I was like wondering why. And I'm just wondering, like, as you're talking to people on the ground, would you happen to know why, like, like a female professional would be drawing like slightly less salary than their male counterparts? Yeah.
I mean, it's not. I think there's a lot of studies that's gone into this as well, right? All the challenges that comes along the way and things like that. I mean, we hear the anecdotes from the ground as well. People have come up to me, like I went to meetups, talked to people about all these things. There are still challenges that comes into play. I think there are also things like natural biases to the whole gender and identity part of it, which I don't know. Unfortunately, some of these things are systemic as well. Like there's a big question mark again. Like we discussed some of these points with the volunteer teams before as well. Like how are we gonna start making some changes into this? Is there any option even to do so? Right. But I think from always coming from the kind of like design page kind of angle, what we want to do is first we want to actually figure out the trends and the data, what we're actually seeing after actually have some concrete numbers to back. Then we were able to start having these kind of conversations to bridge the gap, like why is it happening behind the scenes? Which I think throughout the years there were also a number of people actually came up, some women actually came up to me and told me the same thing, especially at the junior levels. You could see like, oh yeah, I found out because of the data. We actually found out like my male counterpart who is doing the same job, exact same title, everything else, they're actually getting paid more. And because of this, I was able to have that conversation to bridge the gap. So this is at least one of the nicer outcomes, but there were a lot of situations, unfortunately, like there's not much you can do other than like moving jobs or like finding something else, which is really, really sad. Because this shouldn't be an issue in the first place, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. This is like a systemic problem. But I think the fact that you've made this information accessible and you've brought transparency to that data point, it actually allows people to have that conversation. And kudos to the impact, whether it's small or big. I'm sure you at least made a huge impact in one person's life, just based on your example that you shared. And talking about that, and salaries are always a very sensitive topic. I'm sure for our audience members, they'll be diving deeper into the salaries between different countries. And I'm just wondering, like we all know, like in Singapore, the pay is likely the highest. But I'm just wondering, are there any emerging hotspots in Southeast Asia? Like, are you seeing like more hires or more kind of like growth or activity in other countries in Southeast Asia? Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, Before I kind of dive into it, I'm kind of curious, like any hints from what you're seeing? I was also curious to hear your take as well, right? Like any hotspots that are coming up for you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we operate a business in Malaysia and Singapore. So with the tech layoffs happening, what we're observing is that a lot of the jobs that were originally meant for Singapore are actually being regionalized, right? So meaning this is also a combination of factors, not entirely because of the pay, but also some companies are choosing to move remote. Some companies are choosing to give up their offices, so it doesn't make sense for them to just be in Singapore. So they're regionalizing their team. So we're observing jobs moving to Malaysia, for example. We're noticing a boom in terms of the numbers of jobs and product roles, product management, product design. We're also seeing a lot of community activities in Philippines and in Philippines and in Indonesia, right? Because of Indonesia, because of their domestic market, there's a lot of uh, apps and venture capital funding, lots of startups, so lots of activity over there. Um, and and then Philippines because of the community over there, and there's sort of like a demand between traditional and new industries looking at UX designers. So we're definitely seeing like a lot of young people wanting to join the industry, and I think I had a preview, and thank you for sharing that preview with me on your data. And I'm still noticing a lot of people are in UX roles and they are less than 5 years of experience in their roles, and that's the majority of our UX community. Or maybe it could be that the leaders are too busy to fill out the survey.
Yeah. Again, like I think that's a good caveat to kind of point out, right? Okay, our survey is basically on a self-volunteer basis. I mean, in the kind of new report, we actually call out some of these numbers. There's some biases to them, like the reach, the geographic skew. We do this in English, so it's the accessibility is not, we won't cover the full thing. It's all digital, so yeah, there's all these like nuances to this. But yes, what you're saying is right, right? In terms of like there's a lot of responses that is, I think it's all skewed towards a younger. So I think like 80% of the respondents are under 35. They're all concentrated in like urban hubs, like cities and major cities and stuff, right? So right off the bat, at least we've got good exposure across Indonesia, Singapore, Malaysia, some okay ones in Vietnam and Thailand. That's the two of them. We've got made some progress as well. I think Philippines is somewhere we haven't really cracked at all. Just the reach. But I do know people there. That it's a huge community there. Lots of like major conferences that's happening over there as well, right? So everywhere, I think there's like different just pockets of activity going on. And because some of these things, I know, like for example, Vietnam has a very active community, but everything's all kind of like done in Vietnamese and localized language. So unless you're really part of being exposed to that language and you know how to speak it and you see the content and things like that, then you can see those things happening, right? But so yeah, it's also kind of like some of these things that get in the way of like seeing how active and what are the biggest hotspot. But overall, if you zoom out on I think the business lens you kind of cover, it's pretty consistent. Like we do see, Singapore has a stronger currency, so there's always the pull factor. But for businesses, it's always the kind of push, like, oh, it's expensive to do business here, right? And then there's some benefits to it having like a regional hub, the reputation, safety, and things like that. But at the same time, at the end of the day, business down to cost and the whole pay aspect of it. So we do see some movement. We're hearing some movement on the ground as well. I do have one of the head of designs from like Malaysia as part of my volunteer, which I really lucked out this time around. So I do have exchanges with him time to time, just talking about the markets and things like that. So we are seeing some of these movements going on behind the scenes.
That's really excellent to hear. And I'm asking this question also because I've in my past interviews, I've always asked this question to the people I interview, and I said, "Hey, is there a future for product design and UX design?" And it's very opinion based, right? So I'm just wondering, looking at the data that you have on hand, like what's your perspective? Like, is there a future? Is there like possible career growth? Like, can people actually find a career in UX and grow a career and like stay there? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Okay. So I'll come from more a data standpoint first, and then I'll talk about like behind the numbers because today is about behind the numbers, right? So across the board in the survey that we have, actually about 70% did made some type of progress in their career. And we kind of split them out like what type of, whether if you got promotions or took up more responsibility to like, all these other things. the everyone's been making like a huge numbers making progress, but not everyone's getting paid for it, which is an interesting factor. Like I think 46%, something like 46% of it actually don't get any pay increase. So it's like, oof, yeah, it's kind of like a tough nut to swallow. Maybe it is a hard year for business. I don't know. I think there's a sentiment there, right? People are feeling that pinch across the board. So I think put it side by side with what the value of design. We asked this question as well. Actually, a lot of the people feel like the organizations that they work in do value design, right? The respondents was saying like about 70% actually feel value at like, they rate it. The companies actually have some prioritize making decisions based on user needs. But it's kind of like it's not, I think they know the value of it, but they might not know how the best way to do it. So a lot of actually designers or the responses have come back and say like, I have to do extra work to make some sort of education to make sure my job is done efficiently, right? I think it's also about close to 70% of it say the same thing. So the value is there. People do see it. I think organizations do see it as extra work. I think going behind it, whether it's rewarded for the progression, again, like question mark. Now, I think like when it comes to whether if there's a future for design, I will at least talk about it how I frame design, right? And I'm curious to hear your definition as well, how you frame design. This is always an interesting one. So at least how I look at design is basically what we're basically trying to do is we're looking at possibilities of the future, right? Design is all centered around change. We want to make certain type of change because we want to, do something new, build a new feature, an app, launch something, improve something, all those things, or remove something completely, right? It's built on change. Now the job of it is just going through and navigating all the possibilities so we can get to that possible future. And I think designers in the place as well equipped with the hard skills to do so. We can actually put in, prototypes, we can put in decks, we can put in like research just to illustrate that. And it's a very nice skill to have, to be able to kind of like paint that possible future and navigate. And then we get onto the nitty gritty stuff much later on. So with any kind of possibilities with future, with dealing with people, and with as long as people are around, I feel like our jobs will still be there. I'm confident like AI won't take over because they're not like the critical aspect of it. Maybe not yet. I don't know. Yeah. So if you ask me, I'm more kind of like positive in terms of like, yeah, as long as I know how to deal with people, they're not gonna be, we're gonna be still around. We're still gonna have jobs.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your assurance, and I think that's also another data point that supports it. I think recently the World Economic Forum released a report on like what are some of the future jobs, and surprisingly, UX design was mentioned as one of the top few jobs that are emerging. And let me just kind of like grab the data.
Wow.
So Future of Jobs Report 2025, World Economic Forum, fastest growing and declining jobs by 2030. And UI UX designers are at number eight. Number one is big data specialists. Number two is fintech engineers. I think it's kind of, and number three is AI and machine learning specialists. This is kind of like expected given the AI boom that's happening right now. Yeah. So, like digging deeper, I mean, I agree with your definition on design and how it's about change, how it's about like bringing a future vision into reality. And there is so many use cases and applications. Having run a school teaching UX design, I've seen my students explore careers anywhere from product management to service design to UX design, as well as more innovation, CX, consulting roles as well. So I definitely see there's always a need for it. But I think in terms of career progression, you've built, I would say, probably more than a 14-year career in UX, and you were pretty early. So I was just curious, like from the data, what you saw. And earlier we mentioned that it seems like a lot of the people who are filling up the survey, or at least quite a number of people in the community, are still less than 5 years into this business, right, or into this discipline. Um, what are your thoughts around that, right? Like, do you feel like there may be enough opportunities for like upward progression? Or what are your thoughts kind of like looking back at your own career trajectory?
All right. I think all right. I think the what we're seeing, just reflecting on my past kind of like progression as well. When you are a little bit younger and have a lot more energy, a lot more free, I won't say free time, but yeah, you have less responsibility to do so. I think there are at least there are that sense or opportunities for you to actually look out and participate more of, right? I think that's certainly something true for me when I was younger, and yeah, you can keep it separate, but at one point I was running like two startups and day job and burn out completely doing that. Huge learning curve, but yeah, I think the data also show like there's a lot of people out there are trying to like get into the industry, responding and really participating. Now, I feel like again, so it's the looking at just the data is like biases to like whoever we get exposure to. That initial question mark of like, hey, where are all the senior folks, all the executives, and like where are they, right? In terms of like participation, are they actually contributing and stuff like that? But you know, as if you look at it from the different lens of like from a resource perspective, like time is the only resource that we always all of us have to juggle with, right? As you move more towards more senior roles, expanded responsibility, that will basically just get smaller and smaller. And it become a thing like, you know, now we have to kind of pick and choose, right? Should I spend my weekend this week with my family, kids, or like if I have free time, or my hobby, or friends, or should I go and like go and participate? So now it becomes like competing life priorities. Like, yeah, maybe that's the reason why we can't get exposed to some of these things. Maybe that's a different avenue. Someone might is probably doing something differently as well, like the leadership side. I know, like in Singapore, we there was a time I think like Studio Dojo tried to break into the scene of like the middle management part as well. I love to see more of that, but I think right now, as you know, everything is skewed towards a younger one, like less than 5 years. But we do see some of these folks actually not just have design experience, they also have additional experience outside of design, because we asked the two: total working experience versus design experience. And yeah, we're seeing like some interesting numbers.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I think I'm not sure if I can infer that the answer is yes, because I'm also looking at your report right now in front of my screen, and there's a mention that there's a notable compensation jump between being an individual contributor and a manager in the team. So I suppose there is that potential career progression, but uh, we know, like, I mean, being design leaders ourselves, we know that not everyone is suitable to be on the management track and lead teams. But I think it's good to know that we've been able to build our careers around it. Um, and I'm just wondering what stood out for you. Were there any other data points that stood out for you in the report that you feel is worth mentioning as a preview?
Uh, so I think you touched on one interesting thing um, worth mentioning, right? It's what is not in the report that's actually worth mentioning. I feel it's more interesting because so coming again from a data perspective, we see it more as like a linear path, like, oh, it makes sense. The pay goes up as you go to like senior IC lead roles and then go into like management and stuff like that. Now, what is it actually telling us, right? Where are all the very senior ICs? And is management the only path of progression as you get older in your career? It's a big question mark for me because we do see some outliers, which are like senior folks, but they're paid like massively, like uh, paid compared to someone who's at like a director level. And yeah, that's the big question mark there. Like when you're looking at just leveling perspective, I mean, I haven't looked at the how many years of experience did they have and what are the things that signals behind the scenes, but question mark there, right? Is management the only way to progress in a career? Where are the IC leads, staff, even like the fellows, the design fellows? Again, like maybe this is a new concept in Asia or Southeast Asia perspective, but we do hear a lot more, especially in the US, that starts to have this trend of like people from run head of design, run like 50 people teams. They are starting to switch back into like IC roles because they just, you know, miss getting close to the work itself.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I happen to know some of the folks at Grab and have a glean over some of their organization structure around their design team. And I hear that they do have two potential career tracks, one for people managers and the other for I think they call them specialists. So you can get to be a very senior individual contributor, but you don't have to sacrifice your so-called your salary progression, even though you're like very, very senior. And I think they still pay you market rate, despite of the fact that you're not taking on management responsibilities, but you're expected to do things like evangelizing design. You're expected to, really set the standards in craft and to mentor even some of the new and junior designers and to kind of like level everyone up. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
so
that's what I'm noticing.
I think this is an interesting point as well, right? And you mentioned like Grab specifically. So again, like, does this mean like only large companies who can afford to have that split be able to build out a more extensive or more different types of career path for someone who wants to progress, much further into the craft side of things or the practice side of things, right? Yeah, again, like how does that look for like everyone else? I will use the analogy of this. I like to use food because we're all close to food and we love food, right? So the and how I think about it is also like businesses. There's not everyone can run like a multinational kind of food chain or restaurant business, right? But there's a need for all of them at different levels. So sometimes looking at the need itself, someone who's running a very small outfit in a hawker center is not gonna need the more extensive, like, oh, I need like my sous chefs and my patisserie and all those things people in there, right? Because it's just like one man show will do everything, cashier, everything I do, right? Versus a proper full-on restaurant. If you're running like Michelin star restaurant, you have a full extensive team to leverage on, and you have specialists in there, like people who are specialists in like waiting and all those things as well. So it's a bit reflective for in terms of like the design industry. I like to look at that in that way. So yeah, to kind of going back to my original question, like where are these things? Maybe it is just based on the need of it. When there are bigger outfits, when they need to specialize, those things will happen. But then again, coming back to the question of like, hey, is it possible for that even one man show kind of setup to be able to do something that's really, really advanced and get paid for it as well, right? So, yeah, it's just something to think about.
Yeah, definitely something as a food for thought. So, yeah, I think I've also sought another data point that I want to really zoom into and home into, and that's something around education. That's around like skills and where do people acquire all the skills. I think from the report you mentioned that quite a number of the people who fill out the report, quite a number of them have like formal design education. combined with some self-taught skills. So it looks like even in this day and age, even with the competition, it sounds like it's still possible to break into the industry by being self-taught. Is that the conclusion that you would draw?
Uh, okay. I will call out previous year's report as well because this was one of the biggest thing that stumped us for the longest time. Because previous year we asked similar type of question, but we did not kind of like spell it out in terms of like the informal path. So we did have what we actually look at the what we actually got from the data was like we have a bunch of people who are hey they're like highly kind of like educated design degrees or whichever specialization came out, and then we saw this bunch of people who had like no design education, right? No formal design education, and the numbers for the non-design education were actually higher. I was like, wait, that does not make sense at all, right? Like, what the data is actually telling me is like, oh, people who have spent years and years studying this coming out and they're actually getting paid less. What's going on? So it turns out, right, the when we start to expand it a little bit, it the people who actually got who earn more, they are not necessarily uh, uneducated, right? It's just that they don't have a design education per se. But when you look at the qualifications that they mention, what's your highest form of kind of like education that you attain, they were all, undergrads, they were like master degree holders and things like that. So they all actually like 80% of them were highly, highly educated, which is like, that hypothesis came out. I was like, hey, actually, you know what? It means these people are not designers before. It means they're switchers. They come from somewhere else, which kind of land a little bit closer to where we were. Like, maybe this is a interesting hypothesis that we can go with. So this year we actually try to spell it out a little bit more in terms of like when you talk about informal, are you actually self-taught? You have informal courses. You go on YouTube and like go those like crash courses and things like that, right? Yeah, just to get a little bit more, make sense of it, all the things that's going on. Yeah, and truth be told, like I think it's interesting because we're starting to see like the different types of combination of education to getting in. So overall, I think depend. Okay, so I want to caveat this as well because it depends on which market you talk to. The things might change, but in Singapore, at least from a general sentiment, education like design education, like formal education, is not a clear barrier of entry to getting a job. We do see things like boot camps, this online certifications, things like informal courses or self-taught. Like all of them stay around like the 30% mark. So yeah, these people are learning stuff and they can actually practice that. And now the difference is when you go into some other markets like Indonesia, which I spent some time last year talking to the folks on the ground as well. Education, formal education is still a requirement to getting a job, which was very interesting to me. Like, oh, like you have to get something to get there. It's like some of the managers did say, like, yeah, this is something that the industry practice and we just follow it. So I'm
Well, thank
still,
you for
yeah, I would still love to dive deeper into that, but yeah, that's the
yeah.
answer I got so far.
Thank you for that context. I mean, well, this shows a couple of things as I'm inferring from what you said as well. This shows that our industry and our sector attracts highly educated people, right? So the sector pays well enough that someone who has a bachelor's degree or a master degree would want to come in, want to find a good job in the industry and be part of the industry. But also that I can also infer that we are open enough as a community and open enough as an industry to accept people who don't have formal design education and value people who don't have a formal design education and respect them as equal contributors to our team, and that they are able to value add to our teams. And that the fact that many of them have learned their disciplines from like YouTube, from courses, from like boot camps, also tell me that many of the people who enter our industry are extremely self-driven, which I think is good news, and it's really promising when I hear that as a hiring manager. I hear that as a leader. I think, wow, that means we're attracting good talent. What are your thoughts? I mean, you hire people on the ground as well for the bank you work for. Yeah, do you agree, disagree? Yeah.
Yeah, so not just for this company, like previous works experience as well. So I will say it up front first, like being accessible does not mean that everyone can do the job. There's still a bar that we look out for, right? And there's a lot of, I think the throughout the years, there's always this debate of like, oh, our boot camps actually doing more good, more harm than good, and things like that. And there's market saturation and things like that. So, design jobs are actually damn hard. It's a very hard job. So not to kind of scare people away, but it is something that you need to be comfortable coming in and deal with a lot of ambiguity, because when you're navigating possibilities of like futures and stuff like that, no one's going to lay it out and say like, these are the requirements that we need to run through, and then it will work. At the end of the day, 9 out of 10 times, like, things don't go as planned, right? So having said that, right, like, when you can understand some of the principles behind it and know how to start to apply them, I think definitely it is something that is accessible, because we aim for anything in terms of like, we look at capabilities, right? Like if you are able to demonstrate that. And in the past, I've spoken to people and I mentor folks as well. And sometimes, like, there was one instance specifically I remember that I mentored this lady who was doing investigation in the police force, right? And they wanted to switch into being a research role. I'm like, geez, you are doing this on a daily basis on a life and death situation. I'm sure you got all these things nailed down, right? Now you just have to really demonstrate how you apply it in the, I guess, the less serious legal perspective. And then, put it in a sense, put it in a way that people can understand, like, oh, you can relate to that, right? And yeah, and then after that, they did manage to land a role. The team did see value in their skill set and things like that, and they made the jump, no problem. So yeah, I think it's the context, and you do have to know how to be able to apply and then tell the story a little bit. And that will get you a long, long way in terms of like navigating the design industry.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. And it's also something we've thought a lot running so-called a boot camp ourselves, that we try to prepare our students as much as possible on differentiating themselves through like the story and the narrative that they tell, not just about themselves and their career, but also about the projects that they embark on. And we're seeing that as a sort of like a way to differentiate, right? If they can get an interview these days, and I know that's also extremely tough from a numbers perspective. And we are also noting there are other kind of like skills that they have to develop, whether it's like learning to work hybrid with or remote with like international colleagues or international clients, or with like just having just generally better facilitation or collaboration skills to get the project going. And you are 100% right. It's a really tough job, especially if you are in a large organization and you have all the skills that maybe you usually don't develop in design school. I remember back in design school, like they didn't teach us all these things, and it was just like really like just bashing my head in like different jobs to acquire the skills. Yeah, which I think is a good segue to talk about. What do you think are some of the skills that um, designers would need to acquire moving forward to grow their careers and progress in their careers. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. This is an interesting one. Um, quick fire. What is your top of the list?
I always say we built our curriculum around three things: technical skills, critical thinking, and communication and collaboration skills.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Yeah, I mean it is showing. Like I think we have some of the alumni actually helping us out in the past. Actually, the past 2 years, right, in the reports. So, it shows. Okay, I do think so. In terms of what is available, right? I don't think we have a shortage of information out there to for someone to kind of pick up on and learn, right? And I think I posed this to you early on, like, how does that look like? And the thing with doing this podcast anyway is part of it as a knowledge publishing, expand, sharing knowledge freely as well, right? There's so much out there for people to kind of like pick up on and learn. So I do think hard skills are not necessarily a thing to be concerned of. I think that is just part of the requirement to getting into a role because the design is still something that requires hard skills at the end of the day, right? Whether you're doing content or you're more traditional on the graphic side or visual UX service, all of these all require some sort of hard skills, right? Those things, I don't think there's a shortage of places that they can kind of like teach you and help guide you through them. I think one thing that I would say like index very highly on is the soft skill aspect of it, which is unfortunate because some people are more, if you tend towards more introvert energy. Actually, I tend towards more introvert energy. I just bring out my extrovert when I need to. I learned to do that over time because of job, because of context and situation. Learning to read between the lines, and I was just recalling this was one of the best things that I learned in the UK because the British are people who are very cynical. They don't tell you what they think of. You have to, this was one of my first kind of like lesson from our creative directors. Like it was telling me that you have to learn to read between the lines. Sometimes they're not always going to tell you the truth. You learn how to read between the lines. So kind of slowly pick that up through either learning it by practice and or the hard way. I think that is something that is super super important, like the all the soft skill part, learning to kind of read situations, learning to start to also trust what are all your kind of sensors are firing, what are they actually picking up on, and start to connect all the dots and stuff, right, and be able to verbalize it. And I think there was one thing that I've watched recently. They were talking about intelligence in football players, right? This thing around like football intelligence, the player intelligence. Having hard skills, being able to like do dribbles and things like that is great, but when you play in a team setting in a format like that, you will have to be able to communicate tactically, like what you're trying to do, either how you play the ball, to clue in certain things of like formation and adjustments and things like that. Those are part of like intelligence, and it's part of communication as well. Same thing for any kind of design role. It's all about communication. At the end of the day, we're dealing with people. The output can be it happens in a system, website somewhere else, your media, your channels, and things like that. But we still would work with people, and we have to learn how to navigate all your systems around the people aspect of things. So if that's the one thing that I would tell people like, yeah, that's something that you definitely, it's a life skill to have. You learn that. I don't think even in design, you can actually use that across different types of work and throughout your life.
Well, thank you for sharing, and I'm smiling throughout your conversation. In case those of you who are just listening the audio, and I'm smiling because I think there's just so much to it, right? Like it's not such an easy thing to acquire. Not to say that design is easy to learn. That's well, having spent 3 years in design school myself, there are quite a lot of nuances and details that it's really hard to explain to someone who's going through a program for like 3 or 4 months. But at the end of the day, like these skills that you mentioned, that you term soft skills, are like skills that you have to practice or you have to be coached or mentored upon. And I'm just wondering how 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 do you develop like as a design leader yourself, like how do you develop these types of skills with your team members or with your colleagues? Just very curious on that.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of practice, and you do need to learn how to communicate. This is a good chance to bring in like rework. So like the when you're communicating. So again, I mentioned throughout my careers, I learned like different things at different organizations. At Visa, I learned this thing that talks about like my managers at that point taught me this thing, decks that travel, which is communicating through documentation and work, so you can actually say stuff when you're not there. Then when we work, we do a lot more remote, and we have to talk to New York, like Tel Aviv, or San Francisco. Being able to communicate and work openly, a very different thing, a different nature, and work at different time zones, and still be able to communicate what you're trying to say, and get prioritization, all those things, right? At the same time, like what I've kind of learned throughout the community as well is also that aspect of like building a relationship is like actually so important. And we actually did this as a 2-year experiment at the meetup with UX actually back then, where we intentionally make it as the currency of relationship. So you can only attend the meetup if you have someone bringing you into the sessions. Kind of like just, I think the hypothesis were, first off, we build trust, then everything else becomes easy as. Like we want to do workshops, we want to do something crazy, we can do that. And it turns out true. Like the data actually shows us, again, going back to data, yes, the typical meetups, event community sessions, you see like 50% drop off rate. Yes. But we consistently hit about like 80, close to 90% attendance for all of our meetup within the 2 years. It demonstrates a lot to us that, oh yeah, that actually, having the currency of that relationship, building trust, then you can do a lot of hard things. And through that practice itself with building relationship, you're forced to actually know how to communicate. Small talk's not just a small talk, it's a place where we start, get to know each other.
Yeah. And I just want to bring an additional context to the data point you mentioned, because I happen to run a few community events for myself, for ourselves, and in the past, and it's usually very natural for like 50% of the people not show up for a free event. So the
Yeah,
fact that
especially
you
it's free.
mentioned,
Yeah.
yeah, especially for a free event. So the fact that you mentioned that 90% of people do show up shows that there's a high engagement rate, and people do show up because maybe their friends are also going. So it really does make a difference. And it's been 14 years. I'll say 15 years for you, right? Looking at our design community grow. I'm very curious about your observations, looking at the community, looking at like the events. I mean, for everyone's info, UXSG is no longer active, So I'm really curious about like how you see in the community like evolve and grow, and what's the state of it right now. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think from a community angle, we so I some backstory again behind the scenes. 2019 was the last year we've run like USSG. In 2020 in February we actually did the closing for it, and I hosted a barbecue and we brought folks together with the team. It was great because a couple of days later, COVID, all the lockdowns start happening. I was like, oh wow, what a timely session. So it was a nice closure to it. but I do recall some of the conversations that happened in there where we talk about community itself, right? Like what is the role that we play and the purpose and things like that. So I think there's the context, the whole, I mean, the summary of it is basically if there's a need for certain things, someone will actually fill it. From a community standpoint, like if you're doing volunteering work and giving out free energy and stuff like that, likely at some point, you might get burned out for it, because the whole idea of like, oh, now I am kind of responsible. I carry that burden of like, I need to do this because the community needs me, kind of thing, right? Yeah, but that was kind of like a different realization in short time. We just learned that, yeah, actually, you know what? If there's a need, someone will come and feel it. And even though UXSG is not around anymore, then for Singapore context specifically, right, other communities that will actually come and fill in the gap. And true enough, we've seen that happening, right? With, friends of Figma coming in, but this is through Figma, but Singapore product design is here. Design SG on Telegram also grew over time on COVID as well, on the online community. So there are more and more coming up, right? In content design, there's also one coming up. All the women in tech and things like that is also kind of starting to pick up as well again. So I think it still serves a purpose. There's still definitely a lot of things that people do at work. They can't find that either the kind of like learning or the kind of exposure or kind of like experience or hear stories about it. I think that's where the avenue of like people come out and seek community for it. Well, whether it's more transactional, like looking for a job, or people just want to build that relationship. But the needs filled, and I am kind of confident and happy that good people always come and fill that up.
Yeah, I feel the same way likewise. And there are, of course, like communities that are a little bit more commercially driven, where there's a commercial angle to it, but there are also some that are very much from the ground up. And there are people running it, good people running it, giving their time and energy to it. And I just feel, well, as a junior person joining the industry, there's never been more support and more resources than now, right? Versus like all the other years, where resource was so scarce, mentorship was so scarce. Now we even have like ADP lists. There's like so much content, so much people talking about how to transition. It's all out there, including our podcast, which is also something we value at to the community as well. And just to close off on this session, which has been really great. It's been an hour. Can you believe that? Um, what
Nice.
yeah, what are you hoping like to do like moving forward with design pay Asia? Like, are you gonna do another one? Like, how long are you gonna keep running the project? And yeah, just out of curiosity.
Yeah, it's a good question. I say this is powered by my own curiosity. That's why I put energy and time to it. Because there's always questions. I think one of those like was it psychometric tests and things like that came back. Like I'm someone who likes to hold on to a lot of information, whether it's useful or not. If it, not the purpose, but I just like to hold on to a lot of information. So I chase that a little bit. Design page is one of them that I kind of chase that and reviews. Interesting pattern here. What's going on here? So I think as long as my energy is still there, I will try to keep doing that. But at the same time, I think looking at sustainability, like what I really hope to do ultimately is like, again, similar to UX, actually, like if there's a need for it, someone will come and fill it. I want to be able to make this thing kind of like almost run on its own in the future. I don't know if I'm there yet, but I think just getting a sense of like how volunteering works, how do we kind of like scope work, transition stuff. That's just teaching me all these things. I feel like there's still a need for it. And I think just like making sure that information is accessible, pay information is accessible, help people with their careers. As long as there's a need for it, Could be me, could be someone else. Who knows, right? But wait, whatever that's the most kind of pressing and curious in mind, that might kind of like change where my trajectory goes in the future. Who knows? Yeah, that's exciting.
Awesome. I hope you continue with the project as long as you wish to, of course. No obligations. And tomorrow, it seems that it's also going to be the first time that your report is going to be released on Tech in Asia, um, and everyone's going to be able to read about it. And any sort of like thoughts about that? Like Tech in Asia is actually interested in this story, and I think you've been like having a few conversations with the editors. Yeah, like and now it's going to be like published on a major, I would say a major news outlet. Yeah, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean,
Or what?
okay.
Yeah.
I mean, first off, thank you because you're the one that helped me make some like pull some strings. Like, oh, hey, yeah,
You're
I'm
welcome.
a fan of the Terrence book as well. So, um, depending on when you're listening to this or watching this, like we don't know if it's tomorrow or like sometime, but yeah, hopefully it's already out. You can kind of look at it. It is a preview of it, it's not the whole thing, but I think at least I'm happy that it is actually in one of a very public place, because I think one thing we do struggle with a lot is just getting awareness and getting reach. A lot of the 2024, we have like a content sub team, and the big thing that we keep fighting is like, oh, we're fighting against the algorithm. We're like consistently trying to post, but it doesn't get surface unless we pay money. It's like, and we did put a small budget to let's pay and see what happens, and then the quality is not high as well. Yeah, so I'm really happy that it's getting out there. Again, these things will benefit from like exposure, and hopefully that will draw more people into the topic. It doesn't have to be me. It can be someone else who's doing it. I'm really happy there's actually companies in Malaysia like I think what they call it now, Pay Gap Asia. They're actually running on this topic as well, doing it as a business. And like to see more companies, people, communities, coming in and tackle this topic itself.
Awesome. And I suppose we also get to see all the specific volunteers and their contributions in the website itself. So, well, thank you to the volunteer team that made this possible together with Jonathan. Really looking forward to diving into the report, understanding some of the numbers. And I hope for those of you who are listening in or watching this video, and you're able to use the data from the report to be able to negotiate for a better salary, but also be able to help your team members to grow in their careers, in their pay, and in their career progression, looking at how others have sort of traversed this path themselves. Any final thoughts on final words you want to share with our audience members?
Yeah, since you talk about negotiation, always negotiate, because the outcome is once the data we publish the report, the data backs it. Like whatever you do, just negotiate. You will get a positive. Most people get a positive outcome from that. Yeah. Again, whether
Never
it's
say
in
yes to
life,
the yeah.
yes,
Never
never say
say
yes
yes
to
to the
the.
first offer.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Whether it's a just a job or like in life, just do that.
Awesome. Well, thank you for the tip, Jonathan. And I believe that will be definitely a lot of torchbearers and community um, people who are going to step up and continue this project or continue it in some way or form moving forward in the future. And looking to reading the report myself. And with that, we conclude this episode. Please give your round of virtual applause for Jonathan and his team. And thank you so much for listening. And I look forward to seeing you in our next episode next month after Chinese New Year over here in Southeast Asia. So thank you very much for everyone who's joining us tonight.